Hi, welcome to the video. So if you like this, please subscribe. I'm going to go through a lot of stuff today. Be patient, there's going to be a lot of talking, but you're going to really, I'm going to give you a comprehensive view of arpeggios and chords and the formulas that create them. I'm not going to show every shape, but I'm going to show you the formula that will allow you to create your own shapes. So a single formula could potentially lead to dozens of arpeggios and chord shapes, and that's not even counting changing keys. If you can come up with 20 fingerings for like a major chord, you can then apply that to 12 different notes, and there's 240 potential chord fingerings from that single formula. And you can do the same thing with the arpeggios, and it's the same formula. Okay, so let's jump right into this. So basically, one thing that you should know, because it's how I'm going to reference it, is a C major scale. So if you don't know that, I'm just going to show you one octave. Right now, that's really all you need. So it's going to be C, D, E, just 8, 10, 12, 8, 10, 12 again, which is just F, G, A, and then B, C on the 9, 10. So 8, 10, 12, 8, 10, 12, 9, 10. This is your basic Do, Re, Mi scale or Ionian scale. So if you're in the key of C major, this is your C major scale. Why this is important is because all the formulas based upon this one scale. If you have variations, for example, a flat minor third, they would refer to as a flat third, which refers to the fact that it's flatted down one from the major. So if you have a fifth and it says a sharp 5, it's raised 1 from the fifth. Flat's always lower, sharp's always raised. If you got this in one key like this, this can be moved anywhere, so you can do any key. So if you need to do A major, just move the same shape, play the same fingering, and you've got an A major. That way, if you need to figure out the A major chord, you just move to A and apply the same formula that I'm going to teach you. So basically, these formulas. Now, arpeggios are just the notes of a chord played one at a time. So whether I'm playing something like an A minor arpeggio or an A minor chord, the notes will be the same. It's just how I'm playing them. So the formula to figure out those notes will also be the same. So it doesn't matter if you're applying this for lead playing or rhythm playing, it'll still work the same. Okay, so basically if I have a C major scale, it's pretty straightforward, just C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. If I number it 1, 2, 3 up to 8, 8 is your octave, so that's where you start over again. If you skip every other note on it, so going from the C, skipping the D up to the third note, that's why I'm saying you're skipping in thirds or stacking thirds, and then you skip another one up to the G, well, that's the formula for C major chord, just 1, 3, and 5, which would be C, E, and G. Now I'm not going to refer to notes usually because, like I was saying before, if you know it's 1, 3, and 5, then I can apply that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that 1, 3, 5 is my arpeggio. But then wherever I apply that, that's my notes for my major. So in this case it's A major, but if I want A flat, I just move it back into fret. If I want G, it's there. Those same notes in the same position will always work. It doesn't matter where you finger those notes. You know, we're using this shape, but if you want to go G, B, D and go G, B, D this way, you know, again, if you're doing arpeggios, yeah, do it in as many different ways as you can. If you're just trying to find the notes so you can build a chord, then once you know the notes, write them down. If you know the notes on the neck, you can then find whatever fingerings you want for that G chord. Or if you don't know the notes, you can reference something that shows the notes and then find them that way. I do have a video, I'll put a card up in the corner on it, that corner. It's on memorizing notes on the neck. So if you don't have that down, that will help you a ton. So let's go and jump into some other chords. So major chords are 1, 3, and 5. The minor, if you take the 1, 3, and 5 from a minor scale, it's actually 1 less. So that is a flat third. So the formula for a minor chord is just 1. It'd be called a 1 flat 3, 5 because they're not, even though it's a 1, 3, 5 from a minor scale, we're always referring back to the major. So it's a 1 flat 3, 5 would be your minor. And then, like in the key of C major, that would include an A minor, D minor, E minor, or the B minor would be a B minor flat 5. Power chords, that's commonly written as like an A5. And again, if you refer to what we are counting, that would just be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's referring to A and 5 notes higher. That doesn't have the third, and the third is what makes it major or minor, so a power chord isn't major or minor. Some other ones that aren't major or minor would include the sus4, sometimes just called a sus, or a sus2 chord. Sus refers to a suspended. You're suspending the third, which is what makes it major or minor, and you're adding in the fourth or the second in its place. If it just says sus, usually I mean the fourth. I prefer to write sus4 or sus2 on it, because then it's very specific in what it is. And the formula is just, like I was saying, you replace the third and put a fourth in. If it's a sus4, you put a second in if it's a sus2. So in C, the second would just be a D. The fourth would be an F. Now, you could also, sometimes people get confused with the add 9 and sus2, because a 2 and a 9 are the same thing. If I go to my second octave, 8 is the same as C, so 9 would be the same as D. The difference, though, is sus2 replaces the third, while add 9 adds that D note, but it doesn't take away the third. So the formula for that would be 1, 3, 5, 9, instead of just 1, 2, 5. Only one note difference, but you keep the third on the add 9. You can extend in a second octave, kind of like I was talking about. So a 9 is actually the same note as a 2. A 11 is the same note as a 4, and a 13 is the same note as a 6. So a lot of times you'll see chords that say A13 or something like that. Well, that's just a note, and we'll get into how that's different when you add. It's not just adding the 13. You actually you count up this whole grouping and add all those notes that lead up to it. But we'll talk about that right now. So if I'm looking at a major chord and I want to extend it into the next octave, sometimes just referred to as extended chords. So I've got your basic major is 1, 3, and 5. If I go into a second, and if I add another third on top of that, then I add the 7, 1, 3, 5, 7. And again, it's just skipping every other note. When I want a major 9, I'll add a 9, but I still keep all of the notes that came before it. So now instead of being 1, 3, 5, and I add 9, like I talked about before, it's 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. If I'm doing 11, it's the same thing. I keep the 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and I add the 11. 13, same thing. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. So it's all the way up there. Now, if you look at 13, what's kind of funny about that is it's got 7 different notes. You won't see a 12, for example, because that's a G note. Well, G is already in the chord because it's the 5. You won't see 10, which is your E note, because that's your 3. You also won't see a 14, because that's your 7, etc. So by the time you add the 9, 11, 13, you have all 7 notes from the scale. So there is no more notes to add. So that's why you don't have those other ones there in between, because you have all 7 notes. Now, practicality, well, how do you play a chord on guitar that's got 7 notes? Well, you buy a 7-string guitar potentially, but still, that's going to be hard to do a lot of times, to actually find a way to finger it with 7 different notes. So what you need to do is simplify it down. Leave out the notes that are less important, and we'll talk about that after I show you dominant and minor extended chords, because then it'll make more sense when we talk about that. So the next one we're going to do is minor. Well, we already talked about the difference between major and minor triad is just you flat the third. Well, when you go up to the 7th, just like if you're playing a scale like a natural minor, if you notice the 7th note is 2 notes back from the root, compared to in a major scale, the 7th is 1 back. So that's, in major it's here, minor is back 1, so it's a flat 7. It's lowered 1 from it. So that's why when you get to minor 7, it's 1 flat 3, 5, and has a minor 7th, which is flatted 1 in comparison to the major. Then when you add the 9, 11, 13, it's no different. It's the same notes as when you're adding to a major. The only difference between a minor 13 and major 13 is the flat third. that makes it minor, and the flat 7, which and the rest are the same. Okay. Now, the other type of 7th chord, there's basically 3 different types of 7th chords. They're the primary ones. You have major 7s, minor 7s, and dominant 7. Dominant 7, as you can see, is kind of somewhere in between. And that's what, when you see the chord diagram, would just be written as like a C7. It's got the major triad, 1, 3, 5, that's identical to the major 7 triads, so they're both major chords. But then it's got the flat 7 that's the same as the minor 7. If you're in key, it would be the 5th chord in the key, so the key is C, that your dominant 7 would be the G7. Now, it doesn't mean that you won't maybe substitute dominant 7s on other ones other than the 5th in the key. Some blues songs will put a dominant 7 for all the chords that they're playing, in like 12-bar blues or something like that. So, if you look at the dominant 7s, they're identical to major 7s, except for the flat 7. There's the only difference. So that's what I mean. This stuff, once you kind of understand it, remember the differences. Don't try to remember all these numbers. If you know the major triad is 1, 3, 5, the dominant 7 adds a 7, the flat 7, and major 7 keeps the regular 7 that's in this from the scale, then the names kind of give you what's being added, and then just add everything that's in the stacked thirds that comes behind it. But let's go and talk about what you do with these bigger chords that you have more notes than are practical. Basically, if you need to simplify the chords, what you can do is take out the notes that don't really define the chords. So what I mean by that is if I'm looking at a major 13th chord, well, what notes do I really need? Well, I don't even necessarily need the root if there's other instruments playing the root. You know, a bass player, piano, rhythm, an air guitar or something. But it's good to have the root if no one else is defining that. I definitely need the 3 though, because that's what makes it major. So I definitely want to keep the 3 in there. I need the 7 because that's what differentiates the major 13 from the dominant 13. So without the 7, there's no difference between a major 13 and dominant 13. And of course you need the 13 because it's not 13th chord without 13. So really all you need is the 3rd that makes it major, the 7 that defines what kind of 7th it is, and the 13. And then if you add in the roots, great. So 4 notes, very simple. You don't need all 7. They're theoretically there, but a lot of times you'll simplify these chords down into much easier pieces, and that doesn't necessarily make them a different chord. Another thing that can happen is inversions, and we're going to talk about those. Sometimes those are written as slash chords. The slash chord is just when you have that line dividing 2 different notes. What it really is, that first one is the chord, and the second one is the bass note, or the lowest note you're playing. Normally in a chord, like if I'm playing a C major, the C is my lowest note, which is this note. Now if I took off that C and had this E as my lowest note, and only strummed from there down, that would be an inversion, because as you go through it, the 1, 3, 5, if instead of having the 1 as a bass, you have the 3 as the bass, then that's the first inversion. If you put the 5 as a bass, for example, if I pick this up and have the G as the bass, then that's the second inversion. How they be written, so it's still just a C chord though. It still has all the notes. It still has C, E, and G in it. But if you want to tell someone so they don't just play their standard fingering, which sounds different, you could write C/E or C/G to really tell you what notes are being played in that chord, in what order, so if they get the sound they want. You also might have, but you can really add any note on to the bass. It doesn't have to be an inversion. It doesn't have to be in the chord itself. For example, you could put B in the bass, you could put D in the bass, D flats, doesn't matter. And so I might have something where I'm doing the C, and I want the B in the bass, because it gives a different sound. Technically, if you wanted to analyze it, B would be the major 7th. So really it's could be considered an inversion of a major 7. But you don't necessarily have to think that way, because sometimes it won't be that obvious. Maybe I'm just doing something where I'm doing a C chord, and I'm doing something where I'm walking down, and putting D flat. and it's more acting as a bass line than I'm really thinking of that as what does that note make the chord into. So some of the slash chords will be that. You can really add anything to it. Obviously, if you add something that really conflicts with the chord, the underlying chord, it's going to create tension. Isn't always bad, but you have to be careful. Another option, because again, I'm going to be trying comprehensive on this, and remember, all these will apply to arpeggios too. So if I'm doing something, the slash less so, but inversions can definitely be done in arpeggios. But let's go through this part. So I'm going to talk about diminished and augmented. So diminished can be written a few different ways, with a little circle, diminished, a minus sign. The confusing part, and this is the most confusing part about chords, isn't actually the formulas, it's the way they're written, because a lot of times you'll see the same chord written with 3-4 different symbols on it. And then diminished, it's extra confusing because the diminished triad can be written as those symbols, but the diminished 7 oftentimes is 2. And I actually have chord books I like, which writes without the 7, not a diminished 7 like this, but they write them just like the regular diminished, but they mean this diminished 7. And most of the time I'd say if someone says play a diminished chord, they actually mean a diminished 7. They don't mean a diminished triad. So anyways, what diminished triad is, it's a minor chord, so it's 1 flat 3, but the diminished refers to you're reducing or you're flatting the 5th. So diminished, the name kind of gives it away. They're making it go to a smaller number. So if I'm have the 5th here, it's going down 1 fret from 7 to 6. Okay. So I prefer just writing that as a minor flat 5. That, and technically, diminished is correct, but minor flat 5 really tells you what that is. Then that way you can keep the diminished symbol for the diminished 7th, since a lot of people use that way anyways. And what diminished 7th is, it's that same triad we just played. 1, flat 3, flat 5, but it's got double flatted 7. Double flatted 7, again, from referring back to the major scale, my major 7th is here, root is here. The minor 7 would be back 1. Double flatted 7th would be back 1 more. Now what that actually amounts to, though, is that's an A note. Well, A note is actually the same as my 6th. So it's saying how it's acting, they're counting a double flat 7th, but really it's the same note as a 6th from the scale on it. And again, diminished arpeggios, used a lot in metal and rock, you'll see that. It's actually also just stacked minor thirds, so it's kind of nice. Now augmented, like making bigger, so you're raising the 5th up. So on the augmented triad, it's just 1, 3, sharp 5. And you could write it as a major sharp 5, but there's not as much confusion with augmented because and sometimes augmented will be written as a plus sign too. Augmented doesn't always refer to a triad, though you might have cases where you're raising a different note and they'll just use the plus sign, or they use augmented referring to like augmented 11th referring to raising the 11th or sharping it 1. To me, I prefer just using the sharps and flats. I think it's a little less confusing. And these are chords you'll see a lot less often. So, the stuff I already covered, the major, minor, extended chords, that's really your bread and butter. If you're into creating a lot of jazz stuff or creating things that create tension, then this next page is really important. Altered chords, sometimes also called a modified chord. Basically, like I wrote here, the name implies that you're changing 1 or more notes on it. So a common altered chord would be something that has a sharp 5, a flat 5, a sharp 9, a flat 9, a sharp 11, a flat 13. You wouldn't, on some of these, like you wouldn't have a flat 11 because, again, 11 is the same as 4. If I have a 4 and I flat it's actually just a major third. So that's why some of these you don't have both the flat and sharp as an option when I wrote them down. And you can have more than one alteration in a chord. So for example, if you have a C7 flat 9 chord, it would just be a C7 chord, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and you'd add a flat 9 at the end of it. So again, it's pretty self-explanatory on these. Even if you have something complex like this, a C7 flat, and sometimes minor signs are used, sometimes flat signs are used, flat 5, flat 9, well, it's just, again, the C7, which is the 1, 3, 5, flat 7, but in this case it says to flat the 5, so we're going to put flat 5 instead of the 5. And it says flat the 9, so it's a 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7, flat 9. As long as, but again, if you know the basic formula, you just change whichever ones it tells you to change. And that could be any combination. It could be a sharp 5, flat 9, sharp 9, whatever you want to do on that. And so again, this is where those endless possibilities of chords kind of come in. Again, some miscellaneous ones. Some of these are still pretty common though. You have a major 6, minor 6, and again, straightforward. They're just major triad with a 6 added. Minor triad with a 6 added. And again, triad just means a 3-note chord. The 6-9 is just adding the 6 and the 9. Sometimes that might be written as a C6 add 9. Same thing as a 6-9. Because again, adds can be used for any time you don't want to have the full list of extensions added, the 9, 11, 13. So for example, if I have a C7 add 13, which is a C7 chord, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, they're adding the 13, compared to if you have a C13 chord, you'd have the 7, but you'd also have the 9, 11 being added. So, like I was talking about simplifying, sometimes if it says C13, you might be playing actually in reality this one, the C7 add 13. Some composers will be very specific and say just up front, go ahead and play this. And so they'll say that instead of having write C13, and you probably end up playing something more like this anyways on that. You can also add the sus, remember we talked about those, that's just suspending the third to add a fourth or a second. So you can add those into some of these other shapes we've had, like a C7 with a sus4. That would be the same formula as a C7, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, but you replace the third with the fourth. So it's 1, 4, 5, flat 7. So any chord you could add the sus2, sus4 if you wanted to. You can also combine different chords like a minor major 7, so it's just a minor triad, whoever's written first, and then you're adding the major 7 onto it. Okay, kind of similar to a slash chord on that. And again, so as not to be confused, when you do have the plus or the minus, usually that just means to sharp or flat. Minus is a flat, the sharp is a same as a plus. So again, to practically use this stuff, if you don't know a chord, rather than just looking it up in a book, if you know the formula, if I know, again, if it's A minor 7, I know, well, that's a 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. First of all, that gives me my arpeggio shape, so I can use this formula to create the arpeggio. But I can also then say, okay, well, it's A, C, E, G, A, and I can find those wherever on the neck I want, and create either endless arpeggio shapes or chord shapes. So it really frees you up to do the way you want to play it. If I need a chord up here and I only know one up here, well, figure out the notes, whether it's using a formula or just the notes on the neck to figure out what you need, and then find those notes down here. Anyways, hope you liked the video. In the comments section, I will go ahead and write a lot of these formulas down so that you can use them as a reference and don't have to come back through the video multiple times. Anyways, thanks for watching.